Alrighty, friends. So, I saw the movie on the 22nd. We're talking about Napoleon 2023 by Ridley Scott. A lot of thoughts go to this movie. I'm not a movie critic, but I know my Napoleon history. Napoleon Bonaparte is someone I know a lot about, to be honest. Now, I'm going to go from beginning to end. I'm going to explain a lot. If you're walking into this movie thinking it's a movie about Napoleon Bonaparte or the history or the war or, his politicking, his rise to... It's not. The best way to describe this is a Dear Napoleon movie. This is very much a Dear John movie. This takes mostly... is about Napoleon and his relationship with Josephine de Beauharnais, his first wife. Even their divorce is covered, and it's clear that it's really about the two of them, as she takes a pretty, even after his fall, serious role in the movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go scene by scene, and we're going to just discuss everything. I'm going to discuss some cool things. I'm going to discuss some accuracies, some inaccuracies, but unfortunately there is a lot of inaccuracies in this movie. And again, I'm going to stand by what I said during my Waterloo video. It's a movie. It's meant to entertain. I'm frustrated as someone who loves Napoleon, loves history. As we were seeing the movie, my friend's husband said... I told them, I'm like, oh, I'm a Bonapartist. And they're like, what's a Bonapartist? I'm like, I'm someone that supports the Bonapartes, the Napoleonic ideology, the Napoleonic Codex. I'm someone that looks at the Napoleonic era and thinks more good came out of it than bad. So we're going to go through that. We're going to discuss the movie. We're going to discuss a lot that went on. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get right into it. 2, 1. Alright, so we're going to start at the beginning. Now, the beginning actually starts pretty interestingly. It gives a little synopsis of what's going on in France at the time. It's discussing the fall of the monarchy. And this is actually kind of cool because it shows in some way the storming of the Tuileries. Now, this is also where we hit our first inaccuracy. The mayor of Paris had actually escorted the royal family from the Tuileries to the National Assembly. But in the movie, what we see is Marie Antoinette with the Dauphin and I think Princess Charlotte running through the halls of the Tuileries being guarded by 2 Swiss guard, which was actually very cool to see Swiss guard in the movie. I did not think they would even show that. I thought they would just start with the revolution and her execution. But they start with that, and then we move to the next scene, which is discussing, she's just been found guilty of treason, and she's going to be executed. And we actually start hearing a song. It's called Asera, Sera, Sera. That's actually a French Revolutionary song. It was actually very popular with the Jacobins. It means everything is fine. It's actually, if you watch most French Revolutionary movies or series, or even read books about it, they'll often mention Asera. It's a very famous French song, especially when it comes to the revolution. So it shows the Parisians singing Asera as Marie Antoinette is being marched to the guillotine. Kind of makes it look like this is 1789. Marie Antoinette didn't get executed until 1793. Another thing is they show Napoleon Bonaparte there in the crowd watching her execution. Napoleon was not there yet. Napoleon was already on assignment by that time, so Napoleon would not have been there. But the costumes and everything are really good. They got everything perfect. Even Napoleon's artillery officer uniform is very good. But then they moved to the National Assembly. Now, this is where me as kind of a historical, I like things to be right, came in. They made it look like the French National Assembly kind of looked like the British Parliament in a way. They had all these columns and everyone on the side, and then at the head of the chamber was a speaker, and that's where Robespierre is. Robespierre, and God knows I'm the last person who should be making this comment, but Robespierre, I was not a fan of the actor. The man was slightly bigger than Robespierre probably was. Robespierre was a pipsqueak, so to speak. They got a very large man to play Robespierre. But, Robespierre is giving a big speech. He's, everyone's, all this stuff about the revolution. And Napoleon, with his brother Lucien, goes with Paul Barras, who's a member of the Assembly. It's true, he was a member at this time. And they go into a private room and they discuss what's going on in Toulon. They pretty much like, if I give you this assignment, what are you going to do? Again, did not exactly happen that way. Napoleon was put on an assignment because he needed an assignment, and Toulon was where he was sent. No one pulled strings for him. Like, Lucien was a Jacobin, his brother, and not only was Lucien a Jacobin, but he did have influence with Robespierre. But Napoleon really, Napoleon would have been considered a Jacobin himself, but Napoleon was on assignment. So it wouldn't have been this backdoor meeting the way they make it look like Barras is all hands over. Barras doesn't really meet Napoleon until after Toulon. But so they show the Battle of Toulon. I will say one thing about these movies. The cinematography is fantastic. The battle scenes were great. I love the French army in Toulon. I didn't like how they made it kind of look like he took command of the whole army. He didn't. He was an artillery captain. He wasn't in command of the entire French army at Toulon. He was in command of the plan that was later made on taking Toulon. But they also do this weird thing where they have him, and they do it a few times during the movie. They do it during the Austerlitz scene too, where he's kind of dressed like a street urchin and he's scouting. I don't believe there's any record of Napoleon ever doing that. I guess it's a cool way to show him looking at the British positions, but I don't believe he ever did that. They also opted for him, instead of getting bayoneted, he gets shot off his horse. There's a pretty gruesome scene with his horse during the actual attack of Toulon. But the artillery part is actually 100% accurate. That was the whole point of taking the redoubts in Toulon. It was to deprive the British of the harbor where they were safe. So when he takes the fort and then he sets up the guns and he's firing out at the harbor and hitting the ships, that was actually what happened. That's why the British disengaged, and it was considered a French victory, because the whole point was to save the French Mediterranean fleet, which was at port in Toulon. The next thing we see is pretty much, he does this like cocky, like, I promised you victory, I gave you victory thing. Again, Napoleon was actually not there for the aftermath of Toulon, is the best way to put it. He, like I said, was bayoneted in the waist. So he was actually taken to a hospital where he recovered. But also his brother's there, which Lucien was not at Toulon. I don't believe Paul Barras was either. Paul Barras was a very high member of the opposition to the Jacobins at that time in Paris, which brings us to the next scene, which is the Thermidorian reaction. Now, I've covered the Thermidorian reaction on this channel. That is when the, I guess you'd say, moderate Jacobins rose up against Robespierre. In real life, what happened, Robespierre got screamed out of the council meeting, out of the National Assembly. Him, Saint-Just, Couthon, and a bunch of other their supporters fled to the Hotel de Ville, and they held out there. And that's where the actual Thermidorian reaction kind of happened. In the movie, it has it happen in the National Assembly. Robespierre runs up to the top where Barras is, because Barras is the only member of this group we really know of the government other than Robespierre. And he goes to shoot Barras, the gun misfires, and then he shoots himself instead, and he messes up, and then Barras sticks his finger in the wound. Again, no one knows actually how Robespierre's got shot. Like I said in the video, there are three theories. There's the one that he was going to shoot himself because he knew his fall was coming and he didn't want to get guillotined. There's the theory that a soldier shot him because he saw him raising a gun to someone else and thought he could be a hero. And then the third one, which I think is probably the more likely and the most humorous, he got tackled and he shot himself by accident. Robespierre will be executed. And then now this is where we meet the second star of this movie, Josephine de Beauharnais. Now, Josephine was arrested. This is actually completely accurate. Josephine was arrested because of her husband, and she was going to get guillotined. That's why her hair is all cut, because they were figuring out hair was dulling the blades of the guillotine. And they would start cutting the women's hair, so it made it easier to just get to the neck. She gets away, and then there's this big party, this big weird banquet. This is the one thing. Napoleon was awkward. Joaquin Phoenix was a little too awkward. I say this about the entire movie. Napoleon was this man that had a charisma about him. The man literally returned from exile and retook France without firing a shot. I don't get that from Joaquin Phoenix, sadly. I get he was trying to be awkward because, Napoleon was an awkward dater at the beginning. Him and Josephine at this survivors party have a really weird interaction. But then the next scene we see is this interaction with Eugene de Beauharnais, Josephine's son. Eugene was actually a teenager, actually almost a young adult by the time his mother and Napoleon had met. He was actually an aide-de-camp for general, I believe, in the Army of the Rhine. But I guess to prove, I don't know what the artistic reason behind that was, because Eugene would actually become the Viceroy of Italy. And the Prince of Liechtenstein, I think, maybe. He actually is one of the few people to walk out of the Napoleonic era with their rank that Napoleon gave them. So it's kind of impressive. But Eugene was not a young man, a young boy. Eugene was a young man when he first met Napoleon. Him and his sister Hortense, who Hortense would marry Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. That was the other thing about this movie that slightly annoyed me. The lack of the Bonaparte family. They showed Lucien, which Lucien was important, and I'll get to that in a second when we get to the next part. But Lucien was important. But there was no Joseph. Joseph was probably the most important sibling. He was the one that was the king of Naples, who became king of Spain, who lost Spain and then became the commander of the defenses of Paris and then lost Paris. So Joseph was actually an extremely important character in this, but he's not mentioned. They show Napoleon's sisters and mother, but they don't show their relationships with their spouses. Some of them married princes, others married generals. Caroline married Joachim Murat, who Murat is not even mentioned in the movie, which is, I think, such a loss, because Murat was, as much as, I'm not a big fan of Murat, historically, to the story of Napoleon, Murat is very important. So we meet them all as it goes on, but now, after the meeting between Napoleon and Josephine officially, they start this weird dating montage between the two of them, that they're being awkward, and now we arrive to the Vendémiaire, the 13th of Vendémiaire. That's the royalist uprising in Paris. This was the scene I was actually most hyped about, because this is the famous, we'll strike them with a whiff of grape shot. This is what made Napoleon renowned, the savior of the Republic, the man who will protect France. They showed a total of 2 seconds of that scene. 2 seconds. I was not happy. They show him covering his ears. They fire the grape shot into the crowd. It lays out the first row of people, and they all start running. And then he turns around cockily. Not exactly how it was. Napoleon had set up an ambush. It's shocking the casualties were what they were, considering what Napoleon actually did on the 13th of Vendémiaire. But this is what made him a name. But now the next thing we go is to his marriage. And, Paul Barras is there. Paul Barras was also most definitely having an affair with Josephine. So we have the marriage, and it's very awkward. And then we go to the wedding night, where pretty much she's like, I'm a player, player's going to play. And she's flirting with a guy. And then we get a very awkward lovemaking scene, which, again, Napoleon kind of, at first, was that way. If you look at most of the documented history, the letters and everything, it is discussed. But then we now move to Egypt. That's right, Egypt. So the Italian campaign is not mentioned at all. Now, again, I'm not going to attack Ridley Scott. Whatever his reasons were his reasons. However, the reason this movie so many historians wanted to see was because it was advertised as a historian movie. It was advertised as something targeted to us. And it was not. Like I said, this is a Dear John movie. The Italian campaign is what made Napoleon. The Treaty of Campo Formia, all that, gone. Not even mentioned. Like, I think they mentioned 2 seconds of it while he's in Egypt. He's like, oh, my victory's in Italy. That is what made General Bonaparte. That's what made them send him to Egypt because of his success. Because the Directoire was so afraid of him that they needed to send him to Egypt because they're like, let him go there, let him deal with that. We're safe from him now. So I thought that was a loss. They showed the Battle of the Pyramids, which is... No, not what happened. They show him bombard the pyramids and then walk. It literally, the best way to put it is it's literally a shot-for-shot remake of the Vendemer scene. It's literally him standing there among artillery doing this, firing, and then you look over, it strikes the top of the pyramid, and rubble comes down on the Mameluke army. The Battle of Pyramids did not take place at the pyramids. The Battle of Pyramids took place 9 miles from the pyramids. There is no evidence at all that he fired on the pyramids or the Sphinx, because that's the big legend that he shot the Sphinx and that's why the nose fell off, or he bombarded the pyramid. There's no evidence that that ever happened. They do show a little clip of the discoveries, him seeing the mummy and all that stuff. They made a little jab at his height. He has to grab an ammo box so he could get to the same height of the mummy. But then now we get back into the whole Josephine situation. There's a clip while he's in Italy of Josephine having an affair. This movie with the sexual scenes was actually pretty crazy. But they show her having an affair, and then it has one of Napoleon's generals being like, hey, your wife's having an affair on you. And then they try to make it out that that's why he goes back to France. Not the fact that he's about to get trapped in Egypt, which is the real reason. He was afraid of getting stuck in Egypt, so he withdrew. I will give Ridley Scott props, though. They show Thomas Dumas a lot. For those of you who don't know or haven't watched any of my other videos about this, Thomas Dumas is Alexandre Dumas's father. You might be asking yourself, who is Alexandre Dumas? Alexandre Dumas is the man who wrote Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask and The Count of Monte Cristo. He wrote a lot. His father was a general in the French Revolutionary Army. His father actually would be captured returning from Egypt and would spend many years in prison. And then by the time he escaped, was ransomed out, the Bourbons were restored. And what ended up happening was the Bourbon dynasty refused to honor his father's pension. So the Dumases almost grew up in destitute because of that. Thomas Dumas was a Haitian French general. He was actually a friend at one time of Toussaint Louverture, the first prime president and dictator of Haiti. So that's an interesting little fact. And I'm really happy they actually showed him, because in other things about Napoleon, they never really talk about Thomas Dumas. And Thomas Dumas was a very interesting character. Unfortunately, the Germans blew up a monument of him in Paris when they took Paris in 1940. So it's upsetting. But continuing, he returns to Paris. He's being celebrated by everyone. Everyone's happy to see the hero. Which, again, this is where I go back to, I don't think Joaquin Phoenix was the best pick to play Napoleon. I don't understand why they're cheering for him, because I've seen nothing. All I'm going off of is what people are saying. And also, at the same time, they're showing him looking at a newspaper where people are saying he's being cuckolded. So it's like, where's this love and cheer coming from if this is what the people are saying? That's why I was very lackluster by Joaquin Phoenix. And I thought he was going to do great. I really did. And I'm not saying he didn't do great, but I'm saying from someone in the perspective of knowing a lot about Napoleon, he does not have the charisma of Napoleon, in my opinion. I, to be honest, felt like he was kind of being like a man-child, which you could debatably say Napoleon was at points, but not around the clock. But now we come to a famous scene, which was when Napoleon returned from Egypt. He actually was going to divorce Josephine the first time. And it did happen the way it's shown in the movie. He did lock her out of the house. He threw all of her things out. He allowed Eugene and Hortense actually to stay, though, which I'm a little sad they didn't mention that, because that was actually a very nice thing he did. He said, they can stay. You need to leave. They also have them have this huge fight, which didn't exactly have, like, they had a passionate relationship and they definitely argued a lot, but the screaming, it was, and Napoleon would have never talked to Josephine the way he does in this. Not at all. If there is one thing I can say about Napoleon and Josephine's relationship, he loved her to death. And I think it was a very, over the top. There's this part where he's like, say I'm more important than you, say I'm more important than you, and then when everything quiets down, she starts mocking him and being like, I'm more important than you, say it, I want you to say it, and it's this whole back and forth. And then we're at the court, he's being, like, tribunaled by the directoire, and this is actually kind of cool, because they actually name everyone in the directoire, like Saez, Ducos, Fouché, who was the Minister of Police, which I don't know why he would have been at that meeting. Talleyrand, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who Talleyrand actually played a very large role. A bunch of other, even Barras. And then they show this scene where they're forcing them, in preparation for Brumaire, they're forcing the Directoire to resign, which is in part because of the Brumaire coup. Thomas Dumas is one of the officers present. I said this during my one trailer. Thomas Dumas was in prison at that time. He was an Austrian captive, so he would not have been participating in the coup. But that was very similar to what actually happened during the coup. Napoleon sent his subordinates out to make sure the Directoire resigned. Talleyrand was on his side. I did when he tries to confront the delegates of the Chamber of 500. They attack him and they start like what they did in real life. But when he runs away, grenadiers close the door to try to help him, but the guys are trying to get through the door to attack Napoleon still, and Napoleon keeps jumping up and punching through the door, and it's my favorite thing. I will say this movie had a lot of funny moments because he's just like punching through the door, but then also you have this famous moment when Lucien says, if I thought my brother was looking to overthrow the Constitution, I'd kill him myself. And he puts a sword to his chest. It's kind of funny because he makes this and I told a bunch of people that I went to see the movie with, I'm like, that looks like me and my brother, because he makes this face where he's like puts the sword to his chest. He's like, because he's trying to get everyone to go along with it. But they storm in, and it happens very similar to how it is. They move into the Tuileries, which did happen when Napoleon became first consul. And then it had this weird montages, the movie. These very strange montages. Then they had this scene where Napoleon argues with the ambassador to England, where he's like, you think you're so great just because you have boats. Like, the movie really, I feel like, did not show Napoleon's political genius, because he was a political genius. And I think that was a very, that was a loss. That was a net loss, I think. And then after that, we jump to Talleyrand being like, you should be king. And Joaquin does get a lot of Napoleon's mannerisms. Like, there's this thing Napoleon used to do that if he respected you or liked you, he would tug on your ear. And he does it a lot during the movie. They get in a fight after that about Napoleon and Josephine, which they did. They did get in arguments a lot that Josephine wasn't bearing Napoleon children. And then, boom, we're at the coronation. Don't know how. We didn't even go over the War of the Second Coalition. There was no Marengo. There was no crossing of the Alps. We're just, boom, Napoleon's emperor now. And for some reason, Ney has facial hair, which is interesting because I saw this article from the man who played Ney, John Hollingworth, which, to be honest, I thought he looked like a great Ney, but he said that the reason Ridley Scott told him to have a beard was because he differentiate from the other generals, which is interesting because there's actually at not one point that he says any of the names of the officers or anything. Um, but now after the coronation, we're at Austerlitz, which again I think it was pretty well done. The whole battle was, like I said, one thing I'll say about this movie: the battles were very well done, very well done. I just, you see Davout because this is the sector of the battlefield that Davout was in charge of. I like that he's played by a younger guy. I like that he's wearing glasses because Davout did wear glasses. But I've shown the clip. I'll leave a link to it of the battle. That honestly is pretty much it. It's pretty good. It's a pretty. I also enjoy when the French soldiers stop right at the edge of the lake because they know it's there, and then the Austrians and Russians are like, why are they stopping? And then right into the lake. But then we get to the scene where Francis II meets with Napoleon, and he explains to them, oh, the Tsar is very upset today because they lost. And he actually says this thing, which I think is actually a really good point. He's like, I have the entire Russian and Austrian armies captured, including both emperors. He's like, I hope you take this kindness and remember it. Which is why a lot of people believe that they exiled him instead of executing him. Because the thing was, he fought so many wars that he could have annihilated the Kingdom of Prussia, the Kingdom of the Empire of Austria, the Empire of Russia, the Kingdom of all these petty kingdoms, and he could have wiped them out and killed the leaders, root and stem. But he consistently let them go and was fair to them. And I think that was a very good thing to show, because I think a lot of people, when they think Napoleon, they think tyrant and dictator. He was a very generous foe, so to speak. So then we fast forward, and we're really dealing with the marriage problems back and forth. And then we get to the divorce. I was not a fan of this divorce scene. I think this is also probably the best acted scene in the entire movie. I think the two best actors in the movie were Vanessa Kirby as Josephine. I thought she did such a good job because I think she captured how Josephine was. Josephine, like I said, was Napoleon's senior. She was older than him. And she really, not so much did she say it, but she very much had the attitude of, oh, the little man. Like, she knew she was in charge, but in this situation where they're getting divorced, she starts laughing. And she's not laughing because she's mocking Napoleon. She's laughing because she's like, how did it come to this? Napoleon slaps her in this scene, though, and I'm not a fan. Because Napoleon would have never laid hands on Josephine like that. Like I said, he loved her to death. Regardless of the situation, he wouldn't have done that. Then after that, we meet Marie Louise, and the King of Rome is born, Napoleon II. And then we see Josephine at Malmaison, which I don't like that they didn't really go more into Malmaison. Malmaison was actually a pretty big part of their relationship. She bought it while he was in Egypt, and he was furious that she bought it because she bought it with his money. But there's a scene where you'll never know how much you cost me. She holds the King of Rome and says that, and she did say that. So I thought that's a great scene. But then it's immediately followed by Russia, the Russian campaign, which this is where I'm going to tell you right now. The second best acted character in this movie was Tsar Alexander. I don't care. I don't care what anyone has to say. The Tsar was probably the best acted. He captured how Tsar Alexander was. Tsar Alexander was a young hot rod, pretty much. He did not think he was going to lose at Austerlitz, and then when he did, he was humiliated. And then you have the Treaty of Tilsit, which I kind of skipped over. That actually happens right after the divorce scene. But you have the Treaty of Tilsit when the two of them are talking about like conquering Europe and their mutual hatred for England, which again was true. They both hated the English, but Napoleon found out obviously that the Russians weren't keeping true to their word with the continental system, and they invaded. Now, this annoys me because again, there's no mention of Spain. Spain was known as Napoleon's Vietnam. So that's a very important campaign that wasn't discussed. But they do the Russian campaign, and this is where we first see Ney as a field commander. He chases Cossacks that butcher French cavalry. It's a very well done scene. They enter Moscow. All that stuff happens, and then they start the Russian retreat. This is where I start not liking the movie, because they go right from the Russian retreat to his abdication as emperor. There was 2 years in between those. There was 1813 and 1814. He didn't resign until practically the end of 14. Well, not the end, but you know what I mean. Like there was time. There was, I believe, 2 more campaigns before his abdication. Shows him on Elba for a little while, and now this is where you get a very weird. They actually show the interaction between Tsar Alexander and Josephine, which did happen. The Tsar did visit her, but then we get this weird thing where Napoleon finds out Josephine's sick, and that's why he's going back to France, not to retake France, but to go see Josephine, to go to his love. Josephine died while he was in exile. Josephine actually died, I think, corresponding when he first got to Elba. So there would have been no reason for that to be... Napoleon returned to France because he wanted to go back to France. It had nothing to do with Josephine. And I thought that was a very... But again, this is a G.I. John movie. This isn't historically accurate. So the next thing is he gets to Malmaison, where he sits and talks to Hortense. And he demands the letters he wrote to Josephine back. Hortense explains to him the valet had stolen them and sold them. This happened a lot. First, Napoleon's letters from Egypt were captured by Horatio Nelson, and he published them in the British newspapers. And a lot of times people, if it had Napoleon's signature on it, would steal it and sell it. So this wasn't uncommon. But now we get to the scene that drives me insane. And that is the Congress of Vienna scene. Now, you have this situation where the Duke of Wellington is chairing the meeting. It would have not have been the Duke of Wellington. It was actually the Austrian minister. But you see all the powers there. The Tsar is there. King Louis XVIII with Talleyrand is there. I believe you see Francis II there. And Wellington is running the meeting. Wellington wasn't in charge of it. Like I said, it was the Austrian ambassador. And Wellington was actually ordered to take control of the situation by Tsar Alexander. He was named the head of the coalition army. Blücher is shown for like 2 seconds, and it drives me. And they do this weird scene with the cavalry, with scouts, which doesn't make any... It looks like an American thing, like a Pony Express thing. It does not make sense for the French. And now we get into the scene I really hated, and that was Waterloo. There were no entrenchments at Waterloo. They make it look like Napoleon chose Waterloo. Napoleon did not choose Waterloo. Wellington chose Waterloo. One of the famous quotes of Waterloo was, "I saw this ground a year ago, and I kept it in my pocket." That was from Wellington. That was not Napoleon. It does show the delaying in Waterloo, but it also shows Ney kind of leading the cavalry charge in spite of Napoleon, because they're running out of time because the Prussians are coming. That's not what happened. What happened was Ney, who had failed at Quatre Bras to capture and defeat Wellington's army, wanted to fix that, and when he thought the British were withdrawing, he made the cavalry charge. It had nothing to do with trying to weaken. Because, again, there's a scene where they're like, prepare for cavalry, they move out of their trenches and then make the squares. I'm like, if you're in a trench with spikes, why would you leave it to go face off with the cavalry? That doesn't make sense. And also, again, the British didn't go on the field between the French and English lines. They retreated behind a ridge. And that's why the French got so screwed, because when they came over the hill, the squares were there and they ran right into it. It was a huge trap. I will say, though, John Hollingsworth, I'm going to give you a shout out. You quoted one of my favorite quotes from the Battle of Waterloo, and that was Michel Ney screaming, "Come and see how a Marshal of France dies." That is one of the I think the most badass lines any general or anything has said in a battle, and they show it. But they also show this thing where Napoleon keeps engaging in battle himself. That never happened. Napoleon never did that. Also, Rupert Everett plays the Duke of Wellington, which, nothing against Rupert Everett. I think he's a great actor. Duke of Wellington was, like, I believe in his late 30s when he was at Waterloo. The ages of these characters. Like I said, Alexander was done perfect. A young guy, everything of that. But everyone else I was not a fan of, the aging. And then they have this scene where Napoleon's in Plymouth after the Battle of Waterloo, which he did. That's where the ship did land, in Plymouth. And Wellington comes on the boat and starts talking to him and like telling him, "Oh, you're not coming to England. You're going to St. Helena." That it's kind of true. He decided to surrender to the British because he knew they wouldn't execute him the way the Bourbons would have. But when he got to Plymouth, he wasn't even allowed to get off the ship because he was told he would be made a hostage in England, put in exile in England. But the English thought that was still too close to France. So when they landed at Plymouth, they said, "You can't get off the ship." They restocked it, and then they sailed to St. Helena. And then they show the St. Helena scenes, him watching two young girls play games, talking about, the Napoleonic Wars. And then we hear Josephine talking in the background saying, "Come join me, my friend." And then he literally this is literally what happens. He goes and dies. Napoleon died in his bed. I know I'm being semantic now. I know it's artistic and everything, but Napoleon died in his bed. I really touched not a lot, but I don't want to make this go on too long. I don't want to review the entire... It was a 2.5 hour movie. We literally started the movie the day before my birthday and ended it on my birthday. So, overall, it was a good movie. It was a good movie. It beat out Disney's Wish, so I'm shocked by that. But it was a good movie. It was not a good historical movie. If you enjoy history, if you enjoy Napoleonic history especially, it was not a good movie. It was also, there was no fluid story. It was like bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. It was like a sheet you would get from a teacher who is like, you need to study these events. My hope is people are going to see this movie and go, let me actually learn what really happened. I'm still waiting on the 4-hour release, which apparently now might not even be released until 2024. But with that said, thank you all for joining me today. I know this is different than what I usually do, but I wanted to make sure I gave my thoughts on the movie, especially since I did a whole few series actually, about Napoleon just in anticipation for this movie. Again, go see it. Go try it out for yourself. It wasn't awful, but I was slightly disappointed. It was a good movie, though. Not a great historical movie or history about Napoleon movie, but a very good movie. So, if it's your first time joining us, please like, share, and comment. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you're returning to the channel, I know a lot of you are returning to the channel after watching it. Please subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you in the next one.